everybody. Welcome to the Reach the Stars podcast. I am your host, John and Willoughby Lohr. And today my guest is the one, the only Gayle Danley. I cannot believe that I'm sitting here on Zoom talking to Gayle Danley right now. Gayle is amazing. She is one of the top slam poets in the history of slam poetry that ever slammed the slam poetry stage in the world. She has taught thousands and thousands of young kids around the country, around the world. She's amazing. I'm going to let her tell you more about her story because you just need to hear it right from her lips. So welcome to the show, Gayle. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Jen, I am thrilled. And if whatever we talk about here comes anywhere close to what we talked about offline, unrecorded, this is going to be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, tell everyone a little bit more about your story and how you got where you are today.
Well, ask me. Let's be specific because I've been around for a minute. And so the story is, it's a long road instead of a driveway.
Okay. So how did you get your start doing poetry and performance poetry in the first place? Like how old were you when you started writing?
So I come from a place in time where women are not always encouraged to speak. And so I knew that the minute I got away from Atlanta, Georgia, which has really grown now, but at that time, could be a sort of stifling place. So I escaped and I went away to college. I went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and I saw all these bold, kick butt women. And I knew I was in the right place. And at Howard, I started entering different speaking opportunities, really taking advantage of them. And I majored in communications, and I was in the Miss School of Communications pageant, and they had the talent portion. And so my talent was a poetry one year and a monologue the next. And, there was just this real encouragement of women and words. And I just wrote it. And I guess I'm still riding it, Jana. I'm still thrilled with what words can do for a woman.
Oh, for sure. So when did you start doing poetry slams? I know it's I think for the most part, I think in general, poetry slams started in like the early 90s as a thing to kind of get the audience more interactive and to bring poetry to people who wouldn't normally go to a poetry reading, which I think has been wildly successful in the world. So when did you first hear about Poetry Slam and how did you get into it?
Well, sometimes my chronology stuff gets a little off because there were some hot spots in Atlanta. So even though I say Atlanta was stifling, when I got back to Atlanta some years after college, it had grown and the art scene had grown. And so I started going out to some of these cafes where they would have a weekly slam. And then, so I'm trying to remember, Jana, if I won nationals in '94 in Asheville and then started going to the cafes in Atlanta, or if it was the other way around. But anyway, somewhere like around the mid 90s, I caught wind of slam. I ended up going to nationals, having never slammed. I think I had just heard of it maybe a week or two earlier. Mm-hmm. And I went and I won. But isn't that how it is?
Person ever who is like, I always win something. I just went and whooped everyone's ass.
Well, I didn't know anything else. I'd been competing all my life as a speaker, and I knew what it felt like to win. And so although I didn't know the particulars of that competition and that particular scene, I knew what it felt like to win. I knew what it felt like to practice. I knew what it felt like to write. And I didn't know that this would catapult me into this whole big life. And so I didn't know enough, Jana, to be afraid. It wasn't like, oh my God, I got to win this. Who knew?
Mm-hmm. That is so cool. So after winning the the National Poetry Slam in Asheville in '94. You went on to kind of set your own style for doing teaching through young audiences to youngsters around the globe.
Okay, can I stop you there? Because I want to say this before I forget. I don't know what your question is going to be, but let me say this. When you said set my own style, I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that, but it's absolutely right. Because again, I didn't know what it meant to be a teaching artist, right? And I just got the school gigs and I went and did them. But because I didn't study a model, I didn't know there were certain things you did and did not say, or did and did not do. And so I just kind of went and did Gayle in all of her raw on the stage-ness. You know, I didn't know that you weren't supposed to talk to children about death. I didn't know you weren't supposed to cry in the middle of an assembly and force yourself to do the rest of the poem when the fifth graders are your audience. I knew none of those things. I didn't know that there was taboo around being real when you get in front of young people. I knew none of that. And so I just came and with no prototype and brought me. And, you know, there have been some bumps along the way. There have been some schools that have said, it's a little much for our kids, but for the most part, it has just been such a blessing to be able to be me for 30 years in the schools and to not have to follow anybody else's path, but to make my own. I feel really proud of my record as a teaching artist.
I remember taking one of your workshops through young audiences where our local group of young audiences was bringing in our local teaching artists, and you were leading workshops through that. And I remember taking one of yours, and this is before I ever did teaching artist stuff of my own. And like made my own curriculum in a school, because I had done things kind of like after school stuff where I was just winging it. And I remember that the first time I ever was up in front of a class and I was responsible for getting the whole class to write about something, I didn't really know what I was doing either. I had no teaching degree ever or credentials or any experience. I just remember what it was like being a kid in 7th grade. And I was like, you know what? I need a baseline with these kids. I got to see like what they know, what they don't know. And I said, I want you to write me a piece about what's important to you. I got a whole room full of, what?
It's revolutionary, right?
Yeah. And the kids
really
just
start
looked at
asking
me.
kids to write from the gut. It's revolutionary.
Yeah. And they just stared at me like, what do you mean, teacher? You're not going to tell us what to do? And I was like, wait, let's back up a minute. I said, raise your hand if no one has ever asked you what's important to you before. And every single hand in the room went up. And I was like, well, that's a damn shame. Probably not supposed to say that at school either, but that's a damn shame. You're like, what, 12, 13 years old and no one's ever bothered to ask you what you care about? No wonder you don't want to go to school. No wonder you don't care about being here right now, but you should. You get one shot.
You're making my eyes water. I realized that I don't think I was asked that as a child. I mean, were you? Wait a minute. I don't want to lie. I did have a great aunt, my grandmother's baby sister, who raised me, right? So we were talking offline, you and me, about, you know, how you were raised, right? And I was raised non-traditionally as well. And so my grandmother's baby sister raised me, and she would always say to me, well, baby, how do you feel? She would say, baby, how do you really feel? And, you know, this was in the days when children were not expected to have feelings. It didn't matter how they felt, right? They were just tools. They were means to your end. And so for Aunt Ruth to say that to me and to listen, even though she was old school, there was that part of her that was, I think, very progressive and very loving. And now that I'm thinking about this, Jana, she probably deserves as much credit for making me a poet as anybody else that I can think of in my life. You know how we talk about our moms in whatever way we, you know, speak of our moms. And now we're somebody's mom. You know what I mean? Like we're somebody's story.
Yeah.
We're that mom. I'm not doing a good job of describing what I'm trying to say. I totally know what you mean.
You know? And it's I've been thinking about that a lot. My dad, because my mom passed away when I was 20 years old.
Oh, no.
And so I've learned a lot about her since she passed away. And she had this really kind of wild, intense life as a creative person before that. And she got married young and didn't have my brother for about 10 years after she was married. And she had she got married in 1969 when, she graduated college and got married because that's what you were supposed to do in 1969. And then the whole summer of love happened and just this whole feminist revolution. And she was just kind of stuck in this marriage and saying, oh my God, there's so much more that's possible for me that I didn't ever know was possible for me. And how can I just sit here in this life when I want to be the kind of person that can take care of myself, and I want to be able to learn how to take care of myself and to be the type of person that people could rely on. And that she didn't even know that was possible until she was already, 25, 26 years old. And because she learned those things, she taught me all of those things when I was born, But she had taken, while she was married to my legal dad, her husband, she took off and went and lived in California with another guy for like a year. And she sent all these letters.
That sounds fun. Can we do that?
It was such a crazy time in like the mid 70s. And my dad, who is my legal dad, he's not biologically my dad, but he was there when I was born and they were still married. So he's on my birth certificate. So he's my dad. And so she sent all these letters back and forth to him while she was gone. And he saved the letters and he gave them to me a couple of years ago. And just during quarantine, I decided that was a good time to start reading them. And the ways that she's writing about having this whole epiphany in her mid-20s of learning that she has so many things she wants to change about her life and ways she wants to learn how to be self-sufficient. And it's about her struggle of trying to find a full-time job. She never had a full-time job in her entire life. Wow. Ever. And just even when she was in her 20s, like moving out to Hollywood and trying to get a job and having the people in Hollywood say like, you're, not our typical, what we expect women to look like or how we expect women to act. And you're eccentric and weird and different. And she didn't fit in there. And it was just about her having this whole struggle of thinking like, how could anyone ever rely on me? I'm not a successful human. Wow. And like reading all these letters and thinking about that and then comparing it to my own life where I am now. It's like do you have the letters? I do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they weren't written to you.
No, they were written to my dad and he saved a whole box of them and he gave them to me a couple years ago because he was going through his storage unit and he's like, well, these don't serve me. I don't need them, but you might want to read them. It'll give you some insight into your mom before she was your mom and what she thought about and what her struggles were in life and things like that. And it's good for me to read them, but it just reminds me of how much trauma and pain there was in her life. And there was trauma and pain from her life that she gave me to my life. And it's in some ways is good to feel connected to her and to notice that in some ways there's a lot of things that she was feeling then that I would still be feeling now. Cause I've been growing my company for a while and, but I've been investing all of my profits back into my company so that I can scale it without taking investors or selling parts of it to somebody else or taking loans. And so I haven't had a paycheck in a long time because I just been putting it all back in the company. And it's really super scary to think like, what if something would happen? And, if I wasn't married to my husband, if something happened and I was on my own and I have this company and I'm like, I have not had a paycheck in 5 years. It's crazy to think about that like I see so much potential for it.
You all live off of his income?
Currently, we are living off his income and our rental income.
Okay.
Because luckily he has a job that affords us to do that, and it's a better financial solution to do that than to take out loans and pay interest. To just kind of tighten the shoestrings while we can, and to do it as fast as possible. So it's, while I'm doing this, yes, it's super stressful. It's a lot of time that I'm away from the kids, but it's all the time that right now, my kids are hanging out with my stepmom, and she's taking them outside, and they're going adventuring and going exploring. And it's weird. It's funny because we have this really different take on what childhood was, because his mother was home with him all the time. And so all of his, experiences outside of going to school were going and doing things with his mom and his siblings while his dad was at work. And I grew up in between 3 different houses with all these different parents who were all caring for me part of the time, and all these siblings who were interacting with me part of the time. But I wasn't with any of these people 100% of the time. And I learned so much about life from being around so many different adults and so many different family structures and different relationships. And I learned how things work and how things don't work. And I got to learn so much more than I would have if I'd only had one life. And I think that it definitely causes some little bit of friction between us, that like his idea of what a mother should be is very different from what my idea of what a mother should be. But was always super, super grateful in my life that, I didn't have any of these people 100% of the time, but I had so many people who were invested in me and wanted to take care of me and would take me into their families when in a situation. Both my parents were married to other people when I was born, in the middle. I am like the definition of like the oops baby. And it could have been really awful for me. The people involved in this situation could all have been like, ooh, that's the taboo baby. She's going to ruin everything. And I could have, taken the brunt of everyone's blame for ruining all the relationships. But instead, everybody said, this baby's special and we're all going to be part of this. And I'm so, so lucky. And so I see it that all the time that my kids spend with other people, I think is so valuable for them. It's all things that they're going to learn that they would never learn if they were only with me all the time. And so I don't know. It's weird.
That's an interesting way to look at that.
Yeah. Helps me combat the mom guilt, because mom guilt is real.
Oh yeah. I wanted to say to you, it sounds to me like the letters that you got,
Mm-hmm.
It sounds so special, and it sounds like it could make a good book or a good something. To me, that's just begging. Those letters are begging to become something that the world gets to experience.
Yeah, I've read about half of them so far, and they're tough. There are some of them where she's talking about just being very depressed and the things that she was working on then, trying to quit smoking, trying to eat better, trying to learn how to do exercise she liked to do, take care of herself, take care of her body, learn how to, as she would say, be a successful human. And she passed away at 54, still not really knowing how to do most of those things. As far as interacting with people and teaching me about being true to the things that I love and to go after that no matter what, and how to harness my emotions and to use them creatively to deal with tough things. All that I learned from her, hands down. All of my love of paper crafting and my love of writing and my love of poetry and performing and all of that, she stoked that fire like crazy.
Wow.
But as far as cleaning her house and paying her bills, she sucked at that, and she never got good at it. But having the experiences that I had and having these other parents, like my stepmother who was just here, she taught me how to balance a checkbook and how to file papers and how to clean a house and all of these things that my mom had no idea how to do those things. And I got to learn those because I had other adults in my life teaching me things. And, I think all of that.
I still don't know how to do those things. Sometimes I feel like there was a class that a whole lot of other people took, and I was doing something else and I didn't take it because I'm not very good at some of those things either.
I think partly is that there isn't a class on how to do that. And some people have parents who had parents who had parents who were good at that kind of stuff and they taught them. And there's a lot of other people who don't. And I think there really should be a class like that in high school. That's like real life 101. Oh my goodness, Gayle, I could talk to you all day, and I want you to talk about you more on the show instead of me talking about me on my show.
Well, I mean, just a pause for a second. So
Yes.
may I ask, or do you mind telling me what happened to your mom?
She died of congestive heart failure at 54. She had a stroke when I was about 15. And mostly recovered from it, but it did delay her speech and stuff like that a little bit. And she just smoked too many cigarettes, didn't eat well, didn't exercise, worked too many part-time jobs, didn't have health insurance, was stressed out and depressed and most of her life. And it just spiraled into one thing and another thing. And, you know, it's really hard on a person when you know what you love to do and you can't figure out how to do that for your work, and that constantly go out to do work and the work that you do isn't valued and you aren't paid what you're worth, and you can't find anyone who takes you seriously at the things that you believe in. She was very spiritual. She got her master's in divinity and she wanted to be a preacher in the church. But the Episcopal Church thought she was too weird and thought she was too eccentric and didn't believe she had a true calling, and they wouldn't allow her to do what she wanted to do. So she just took every part-time job she could get. She worked like 5 part-time jobs. She was at work like 60 hours a week and came home with like $15,000 a year. Somehow she had a house, 2 kids and a car and a ton of debt and no partner. And it was tough on her. And so I knew that growing up, I was like, I love her and I love her creativity, and I want that for myself, but I don't want that's such a hard struggle to find a way to do what I love. And
is that why you stay in your marriage?
I mean, that's definitely part of the reason that I recognized my husband as a good egg before we got married. I saw him and I met him, and I actually said to a friend of mine, I was like, we were asking, where are all the good guys? Where are all the good guys? And she said, his nickname is Burn. And she said, what about Burn? And I said, Burn's the kind of guy you love forever. But if you're not ready to love somebody forever, you don't fuck with that. And over the course of that summer, after I said that, I just kept thinking about him. And I was like, he is that guy. He is that guy that you would love forever and who would love you forever and really be there for you. He's got his shit together. He makes sense. That guy's a dad who has no kids. Mm-hmm. And so we got together and it was super easy, and we made a life for ourselves, and it was a good choice. It was a good choice. He's a great man, and I am so lucky and indebted to him for the sacrifices he's made for me to do what I love every day. All these things that I had as my, these are the things I want in order to have my life be where I want it to go. In college, he's afforded me all of those things and has put a lot of the things that he loves to do on hold while I do this first, because it just made more sense for me to grow this company. And then once it gets to where it can pay us enough to supplement his income, then he's going to quit his job and start his own company and do his own art stuff. But he made more money at his job, so I quit my job first. It just made sense. And it's funny because we're two totally different kinds of people, though. He's very, very even keeled. He's very middle of the road. I would say that in a lot of ways that I'm very passionate and excitable. It's very obvious. He's very kind of subdued, and he observes everything. He won't raise his voice to be heard over other people that are talking ever. He just waits for a space where he can say something. He's not a small talker. He's not going to say anything unless it's really, useful and pertinent or very funny. So it makes an interesting relationship for someone like me, who's such a showboaty kind of person, to be with someone who really just would rather just kind of be behind the scenes, and he's all about the process and not about the result. And I am all about the result and sharing that result with people. So it's interesting.
That is interesting. Well, thank you for, for indulging me in that. That was
anytime, because I'm a showboater. So I want to hear more about you and what you've been up to more recently with your new agency that you're putting together. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So come on, give me a question about the agency.
So you recently started this new poet management agency type of thing.
Poet nurturing.
Your little poet garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want you to just tell everybody more about it, fangirl, about your poet garden, and tell us about how cool it is.
You know how you said earlier that when you went into the classroom, you didn't have a blueprint, but you knew what you had needed as a student, right? As a little girl. And that's been my approach so far in launching Poetry Prose. Is in my 30-year career, in and out of different classrooms all over the country, what was missing? What do I wish I had had? What supports did I need that maybe those organizations weren't able to give because they were so large, or they were so busy doing this, or they were rigid, or whatever it was that was going on. And so I'm trying bit by bit to bring all of those things into Poetry Prose, because I think when your artists are happy, when they feel loved, when they feel nourished, when they feel supported, when they can get a good word from you right before they step on stage, when they can get paid from you and not wonder when or if the money's coming, if they can get some feedback on their performance that doesn't tear them down, but makes them ready for the next opportunity. So all of those things. So I'm building it from the ground up, going back to a lot of places where I've been and telling them about Poetry Prose. So it's really allowing me to reconnect with some folks who maybe I haven't spoken to in 20 years. It's kind of like, Gayle? Gayle Danley? So that's been fun, to say, yeah, Gayle Danley, how have you been? Long time no see. I've got this great thing. And it just feels so good to have my thumbprint on somebody else's trajectory, right? For somebody to be able to look across their shoulder and say, yeah, I'm working with Gayle Danley and she's bringing me the best that she's got. Because I think a lot of these folks who are part of these arts organizations are not necessarily artists. They might be more administrators. They might be more business. Or they might be arts lovers, arts advocates. But that's one thing, right? That's one pot to fry the chicken in. The other pot is somebody who's in it, who's got flour on their hands and grease across their faces because they're in it. They're in the chicken. And so I wanted to bring that boots on the ground perspective and sensibility to these artists and to the folks that we are serving.
I think it's so amazingly wonderful and necessary that what you're doing exists in the world.
And I also wanted to bring artists who might not necessarily get a shot at these classrooms because they're different. If you look at the rosters of the major arts eds organizations, for the most part, you will find people who we think of as, very acceptable people. And I wanted some artists who wouldn't necessarily get a spot in the English classroom or in the cafeteria with the microphone, but are just as necessary. Their voices are just as necessary, especially now that we have kids who are bringing their real selves to us. right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm allowing the kids to lead the way in terms of the art that they want, the
Yeah.
art they need, and not so much the art that I think they want.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of getting out of the box with some of that stuff too, and that feels good.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to college, we talked a little bit before we started recording about making my own major in school because I wanted to be an artist and to be creative as my career, and I didn't want to be broke. And I would say that the vast majority of people who go to college for something creative, writing, performing, visual art, music, whatever, the amount of classes that they have that are dedicated to teaching them how to market that and how to do something with that and how to represent themselves and get gigs doing what they love is less than 5% of the time that they spend in their education. And so they get out of college and they're like, oh, I want a job. And there are no jobs. You're never just going to open up Craigslist and find a full-time gig as a traveling slam poet. Like you got to make that for yourself. And you know, there have been some really amazing slam poets or performance poets who have figured out how to do that and have also figured out how to build courses to teach other people how to do that. But a lot of those courses are extra things that people have done to kind of supplement regular education. And I think that having your organization is just so necessary because there's so many amazing poets and amazing performers out there. And they're all people that I think young people really, really need to see.
And then sometimes I see the slam poet of the day, you know, the one that the arts organizations love. And I go, really? That one? No, you know. So I mean, I hope I'm not just being a hater, but I just feel like how we define what makes good art is so subjective. And I think sometimes who we choose as the right teaching artist, it means that sometimes we're looking over other people who could really do the work and bring a really different kind of experience to the children.
Yeah, I think
I'm like testing the boundaries, I guess, of that. Like, you know, what is it? Can we do that? Can we? Is that okay? Can I? You know what I mean? Because I really don't feel like I have a lot to lose with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my favorite thing about being a teaching artist in the first place was being able to go into the classroom and the kids see you as the teacher for the day. But because you don't necessarily need to give out grades, you can treat the kids like people.
Yes.
And that they could have their whole life changed because of one class with you. That you get them to think about the world in a different way or think about themselves and their abilities in a different way. And I mean, I remember one of my experiences as a teaching artist, I had the kids get up in the front of the class and read what they had just written. And the first time I asked them, I said, who's going to get up and read? And nobody raised their hand. And I said, who is able to get up and read? And a couple of hands went up. And I was like, all of you should be able to do that right now. And you should do it because you can and not because anyone is going to make you. And that's what my mom told me when I went to kindergarten. I said, this is boring. And she said, do it because you can. Show them everything that you can do. And you'll get so many more freedoms afforded to you in life if you do what is asked of you. And if it's easy for you, awesome, do it. And so I got these kids to say, all right, well, I guess I am able, I can do that. And there were a couple of the kids whose reading skills were really, really suffering and who weren't able. And I was like, we're going to fix that. And where other teachers would have kids read out loud in class and they would just kind of skip over the kids who weren't good at it because they thought it would embarrass them. And in some ways it might, but I was like, it's even more embarrassing for them to grow up their whole lives as the kid who got skipped because they didn't know how to read. And I'm like, I would rather take the time and teach this kid how to read in 7th grade so he doesn't have to deal with that for the whole rest of his life. And I did. You know, there was this kid who didn't recognize the word any in 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. And I worked with this kid a couple hours a week. And by the end of our 6-week session, he was reading something that he wrote in front of the class and was super proud of it. And, like that's the kind of thing that a lot of, full-time teachers, their jobs are so crazy right now with all the testing requirements and this and that, and not even adding COVID into any of this, just the regular things that are expected of full-time teachers. They don't have space in their minds and time in their day to take time like that with every kid. And that's why I think teaching artists are so vital and important. And, when you take the joy and the writing and the art and the joy out of education, no wonder kids don't want to go to school. Like, no wonder.
That's something to really think about. I'm glad you brought that up. You have the kid, they don't want to share. Yeah. And what do you do? And I think sometimes I fail at that. I'm not always good at that. And I guess I rationalize by telling myself, well, just because she isn't sharing while she's with you, she's not sharing right here, right now in this workshop where you want her to, doesn't mean that this experience wasn't good for her. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if that just means I need to learn more about getting children to open up and share what they've written, or if if that way of thinking is a good way of thinking, like it's okay. Mm-hmm. Everything doesn't have to happen right now and for me. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I struggle with that even 30 years in as a teaching artist.
I mean, obviously there's space for writing things that you don't want to share. And I never forced anybody to do it. But, I was thinking if you created something and it's your thoughts and it's your feelings and it's your life on that paper, I want you to be able to feel proud about that. And there is no shame in sharing your feelings with other people. And I really wanted to impart that onto other kids, because when I was young, I had hardly any friends in grade school. I was super dorky. My mom was a heavy smoker, so I smelled like cigarettes all the time, and she was broke. I had hand-me-down clothes that were all weird and too small, and I was just a weird kid with a weird name, and I made weird faces, and I was just a total weirdo. And in grade school, middle school, that's definitely not what's going to make you the popular kid, that's for sure. And my writing and my poetry and my journal was my best friend. It would listen to anything I had to say. And, when I felt like I didn't have anyone who wanted to listen, my mom made me go to an open mic. I showed her my poems and she said, "These are amazing. You need to go read these to people." And she took me out to an open mic where it was all adults in the audience. And I read my poem to the audience and people started clapping.
Nice. This was the 90s? When was this?
96.
Wow.
Yeah. No, 94. I was 12 when she made me start.
So when I was in Asheville.
Yeah, well, you're kicking ass and taking names, winning the World Poetry Slam.
And you were a 12-year-old.
I was a 12-year-old reading my emo poems at an open mic at an art gallery, but she made me go. And I am forever grateful that she did, because when the world feels empty, and it's Dan Savage comes out with that It Gets Better project, right? And I was definitely one of those kids that had I not had a glimpse of what the world can be like when you're no longer in school, where it does get better and that people do value poetry and they think that what you have to say and how you feel is deep and important and useful, and that can help other people feel connected in their lives. That had I not known that that was a thing, the rest of middle school and high school would have been so hard for me. But because I had this glimpse of someday it won't be like this, and I will live in that world of adulthood where this is no longer something that people think is stupid, and that's something that people think is really cool, and you get respected for having that talent of a way to talk about thoughts and feelings in a way that others can connect to. I mean, what else is there in the world? What else
would have been crazy if we had met when you were 12. I would not. Thank thank goodness we didn't, right? Because it would have been like, I really like that poem that you did, Miss Gayle. And I would have said, thank you, baby. Do you write? And you would have said, yeah, Miss Gayle, I write. Well, I'm just thinking it could have been like that adult, like kind of pat on the head thing. Mm-hmm. Or it might not have been that. It might have been something else where, take my email address and let me see your poetry. But chances are it would have been like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, the poems I wrote when I was 12 are not my best work, but there were some good lines in there. There's a couple of good lines in there. And I actually, in one of my most recent poems, I kind of did a little throwback, like a pat on the back to a line that I wrote way back then, talking about the bonds of love being chopped by a cleaver. And I wrote a line about things being finally uncleaved. It's interesting.
Homage.
Okay, so I don't want to run out of time. At the end of all of my podcasts, I ask all the guests the same 5 questions because I love to hear different people's answers to the same questions. So it's 5 questions time. Okay. Number 1, tell me about an experience that you had in your life that changed who you are today. Like a single moment where after that moment, you're like, it's all different now.
I imagine that your other guests know what that thing is, but I think for a lot of us, it's a shameful thing. And so you have to kind of weigh out, like, I don't know where this podcast will go. I don't know where it will show up. So, and I don't want to regret sharing that. But, I had a response. It came immediately, but let me think of something else.
Every time I ask this question throughout these 5 questions, every single person says, I've definitely said things in the answers to these questions that I have not said anywhere else, which is pretty cool. I think that's cool.
So I guess the number 2, second in line, would be when I was in 10th grade, and they were holding elections for officers for the following year. And so I ran as a 10th grader, I ran for 11th grade class president. And as part of running for that, I had to do a speech. And, I worked on it and I said it out loud and I worked, wrote it down and went back and forth. And when I got up to do it, we were in the gym and I knew that it would go over well, but I didn't know that the crowd went insane. They went insane. And that's one of those times that I knew I was going to be a speaker. I was going to be thrilling audiences for the rest of my life.
That's amazing.
That's your safe answer.
I love it. I love it. I remember practicing for the Richmond speaking contest and memorizing El Dorado way back in the day.
Nice.
To do that. Okay, number 2, when you feel defeated or overcome, what do you tell yourself to keep going?
I call all my closest girlfriends and I tell them what's going on and why I'm feeling and what happened. And I get all this comfort and all this advice and all this perspective. And I roll it over for, depending upon how deep the defeat was, kind of determines how long it takes me to roll through it. It could take a day. It could take a week. It could take a month. And then I'm a runner. So I run every day too. And so I run it out or I walk it out. And sometimes I laugh, like I'll turn the hurt into something hilarious. Sometimes I'll teach it. Like recently, one of my line sisters said something about my hair and it really was very hurtful. And so I turned it into a lesson that I could teach from. Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't worry about your hair. And so that's kind of how I handle. Wait, ask me the question again. Make sure I answered it.
Oh, I think you answered it. It's when you feel defeated or overcome, what do you tell yourself? What do you do to keep going? Mm-hmm. We have like 10 different things. Like I do this and then I do this. And then I do all that. Of those are great excuses. And you have awesome hair and fuck whoever told you you didn't.
I like my hair too. Thank you. I like my hair.
I think it's great. Okay, number 3. Tell me about a way that you overcame a failure or a mistake and what you learned from it.
That one's kind of similar to number 2, isn't it?
Sort of. I mean, one's just like, if number 2 is kind of like when you're feeling crappy about yourself, what do you do? And this one's more like, what did you learn from something that you might not have done, the right way the first time? And how did you?
So let me hear the third question again.
So tell me about a way that you overcame a failure or a mistake and what you learned from it.
I don't know if I ever overcome mistakes. I just make them and get a good laugh or get a good lesson and keep it moving. I think I just make them and try to keep them in perspective. Try to keep the larger goal. Okay, Gayle, what's the end game here? Mm-hmm. And as long as I can continue to see it, I can keep walking toward it. And so it's no overcoming it. It's just doing it and keep it moving.
I love that. I think that's a great way to look at it too, because a lot of people get really hung up on their mistakes and say, if I can't overcome this and I can't fix it, I can't make it right, then I can't keep going forward. And I think that that's not at all true. And I love that your perspective on it is like, you just roll on over it and it's still going to be there. And you're probably still going to get little speed bump reminders of it. And,
it's all a poem. I think like being a poet and being a poet that's real close to the word too. Like I'm not one of those poets where it's like, oh God, I hadn't written a poem since last year. No. It's my breath. It always gives me that place to go. Like you said earlier, I always have that place. And so whatever mess up I do, whatever doesn't go right, whatever goes very right, it's just so accessible. Mm-hmm. And that gives me a lot of peace and a lot of comfort.
I love that. Oh, we have to like make another date and talk more when we have more time, because I want to talk to you all day. Okay, number 4. What one trait or habit is most responsible for keeping you on track?
My humor. Being silly. Everything's a joke.
Yeah, you can't take life so seriously. It's not permanent.
Everything's funny. And if it ain't funny now, it'll be funny next Monday. You know, everything's on the waiting list to become a good joke or a decent poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was 20 years old, all in the span of 6 months, my mom passed away. The love of my life got shipped out into the military. And then my dorm burnt to the ground with all my stuff in it, all my journals for my whole life, everything, on my mom's birthday.
Oh, gosh.
And then they cut my financial aid for my final year of school, all in the span of like 6 months. And I remember like 3 days after the fire, I looked at my roommate and I was like, dude, all of our shit burnt up.
And you had a good laugh off of that. Wow.
Oh yeah, man. And it was just like, it has to be funny. It has to be funny because I'm never going to survive if it's not funny. And after that, it was just like all the, like you said, don't sweat the small stuff. It was just like, it's all teeny tiny little itty bitty small shit. After you've had a 6 months like that, so-and-so saying something about so-and-so, who gives a shit? That's like,
I think you also get a certain perspective or a certain understanding about things once you lose your mom. Mm-hmm. I think because she's like your ground, even if she might not necessarily be good ground. Mm-hmm. And I think that once you lose her and you have to figure out how to walk on for the rest of your life without her, everything feels to me like the small stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Most everything. Everything. Let me not jinx anything.
The like question number 1, the experience that shaped who you are today is totally like the minute that my mom died, I was like, everything is totally different forever.
Yep.
Forever. Yep. Okay. Number 5. We're on the last one. Number 5. What's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten, and what advice would you give to other people?
Mm, that's a good one. I'm trying to think of some of the things that I have an older brother, Troy. Some of the things that he has said to me over the years that have been really resonant for me. Um, he went through a period of his life where he was a practicing Muslim. And one of the, I guess, tenets of the faith is always leave something better than when you came to it. And so I took that to mean if you go into a public restroom and it's a bunch of paper on the floor, pick it up and throw it away. Or if you encounter someone who is hurting, do your best to make them feel better or to help them out. Or if something is wrong in your world, try to make it right. And so I think I'm going to go with that, Jana. I think I'm going to go with when you come to something that is askew, try to write it. Get it, write it. I wasn't thinking of it like the W right. But, try to make it right. Do what you can with your world to make your world a better world.
Yeah, do it because you can, not because anyone's going to make you, right? My mom was a smart lady.
If somebody's a hug, give them a hug. Yeah, your mom was a smart lady.
She was. So that's the best advice you've gotten. But from your life experience, what advice would you give to other people?
Know when to open your ears and when to shut them. I went out car shopping with a close friend of mine last month. And the dealership turned her down, and she had all this money and she was ready to go, and they turned it down. And so I talked to her a few days ago, and she was on the way to New York to start filming a pilot for HBO. And I said, "Oh, how are you getting there?" And she said, "Well, I'm driving. I'm in my new Porsche." Had she listened to that fool over at that dealership who said, "No, we can't finance you," and on top of that, Jana, he said, and probably no other dealership will finance you because we use all the same rules and all the same banks. I'm so glad she didn't listen to him. I'm glad she was like, because she was in her Porsche driving to New York. So for me, the trick has been knowing who to listen to, who to believe, who to trust, and who to just go, "Well, thank you, baby."
Mm-hmm.
Because you didn't have my answer. Because my answer is yes, and you said no. So, like knowing when to do that and knowing when to say, "Come on, come in. You're right. I trust you."
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay, we have a couple more minutes before I have to run to this other meeting. Would you do a poem for us today?
Wow.
Not to throw you on the spot.
Yeah. You throw everybody on the spot like that?
No, but the chance to have Gayle do a poem on my podcast, I can't pass it up if you're willing to do it.
Hold up. Let me grab something off of the dresser.
Sure.
All right. So
you're back.
He's back. This one is old, but it feels brand new because I haven't read it in so long. I want to dedicate it, Jana, to you and your mom and me and my mama. He was the next Michael Jackson. Only his afro was big and his dream. Eric Tigg lived about 3 wishes away from my mama's house. Make a left, then a right past palm-sized cribs where at least the windows looked up. Little Eric Tigg had his own poster back when Kinko's wasn't even alive. Live at the Soul Room. Eric Tigner. Come see the 10-year-old sensation sing his hit. Peace, brother, peace. Free admission, drinks half off. come see the next Michael Jackson. So we did. Mama said we needed to have our ears pierced with inspiration, see a star and believe in its glow. I saw women on stage dancing as if their lives would end if they stopped. Like if the DJ took a bathroom break, their hearts would stop beating. Legs, arms, eyes, desperately scanning the restless crowd, and the next Michael Jackson on tiptoes to reach the microphone, skipping his math homework just to sing peace. Brother, peace. You got to learn to love everybody. I could barely spell peace. 8 years old, still struggling to grip the handlebars of Mama's weekend-only hugs. Eyes trapped on the women's shiny skin. Were they hurt? Why were the women in such tiny clothes and the men all done up in suits thick like armor, smiles staining their lips? Where were the Mama's children? Questions dotting my arms like chicken pox, too dangerous to scratch. The sores might break open and spill pus on my skin. If I stood close enough to my Mama, would she let me hug her? How many seconds would die before she opened her arms to push me away? Eric's voice got trapped in the bottom of beer cans, collapsed on the dusty faces of dollar bills tossed at dancing women, hitting waiters' hands so grateful for the rent money. I couldn't unstick my eyes from my Mama's face, flickering red and yellow, then nothing. Red, yellow, green, nothing, gone. Red, yellow, green, white, green, gone, green, yellow, gone. In disco light. Also lonely.
Oh, so good.
Can you believe she took us to a strip club? Oh my God. But it was for a good cause, right? To hear little Eric sing.
Oh man. Gayle, thank you so much for being on my show. Yeah. I see us doing another show in the future. I think we should do a part 1 and a part 2 if you're down. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. Can you tell everyone where they can find you online?
Yeah. Let's see. What is it? Gayle Danley. I'm on Instagram at Gayle Danley, Gayle Danley, Danley. I'm on Facebook. And where else? Poetry Prose is also on Instagram, PROS, no E. And yeah, that's where I'm at. And don't forget, I have some more questions to ask you as well about Buffalo stuff. But anyway, awesome. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening and watching along. If you're watching the videos on YouTube on the Reach the Stars podcast, I am your host, John Willoughby Lore. My guest, Gayle Danley. All of the links to all of her amazing things that she's been doing. And I'm going to put the rest of her bio into the show notes on this because you need to read her bio because that shit is crazy.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Skills over here. So thanks again for hanging out on the Reach the Stars podcast. We will see y'all next week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Jen. Bye.
A single interaction has the power to change your life forever. This is a place for the stories of those moments. Stories of pursuing dreams, overcoming tragedy and failure, of coming back to life after so much of what feels like dying, of continuing on with only a vision as a map. This is the place where those moments live on. Come sit by the fire, look up at the stars, and be forever changed too.
Thank you for being with us on the Reach the Stars podcast. Our theme music is generously provided by Byrocratic. You can find him on bandcamp.com. Thank you to all of our current patrons, guests, and everyone else who helps make this dream a reality. We are so proud to be building this amazing community with all of you. If you love this podcast, please consider sharing with a friend, leaving a review on iTunes, and becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/reachthestars. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the videos of these conversations. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, do something cool and tell us about it.